The warning alarm screamed through every corridor of the massive colony ship, as 30,000 human souls felt their dreams die in the cold vacuum of space. Children pressed their faces against viewing ports, watching sparks fly from the crippled engines while their parents tried to hide their terror behind forced smiles. David Reynolds had commanded the New Horizon for 8 years, guiding her through the long journey from Earth to what was supposed to be humanity's new home. The paperwork alone had taken 2 years to complete, every form filled out in triplicate, every regulation followed to the letter, every fee paid to the Galactic Council's endless bureaucracy. They had done everything right, followed every rule, respected every boundary the alien governments had set for them. Now 3 sleek Council enforcement ships hung in space like predators, their weapons still glowing from the attack that had torn apart the New Horizons' drive systems. The lead vessel was twice the size of the human colony ship, its hull decorated with the flowing script of the Altair Collective. These were the Council's enforcers, the ones who made sure younger species knew their place in the galactic order. The communication screen flickered to life, showing Admiral Theron's reptilian features. His scales were a deep blue color that humans had learned meant authority among his people. His eyes were cold and calculating as he spoke in the universal trade language that all spacefaring species were required to learn. Human vessel, your colonization permit for planet designation, Kepler 438b, has been revoked by order of the Galactic Council. A more suitable species has submitted a claim for this world. You will depart immediately and return to your designated territories. Reynolds felt his hand shake as he activated the reply channel. Behind him, his bridge crew worked frantically to assess the damage to their ship. The news was not good. Without the main engines, they could not make the journey back to human space. The backup systems could barely maintain life support for the massive population aboard the colony ship. Admiral Theron, we have followed all proper procedures. Our permit was approved by the Council's Colonial Administration. We have 30,000 civilians aboard this vessel, including 8,000 children. Many of our colonists have already entered stasis pods for planetary landing procedures. We need time to contact Earth and arrange for transport ships. Theron's response came without hesitation, as if he had been expecting this exact conversation. The Mindari Collective has demonstrated that they can make better use of this world's resources. Your species lacks the mental discipline required for efficient planetary development. As for your civilians, that is not the Council's concern. You have 36 standard hours to evacuate in your emergency pods before we destroy your vessel as a navigation hazard. The screen went dark, leaving Reynolds staring at his own reflection. Around the bridge, his officers looked at him with expressions of shock and growing anger. They all knew the mathematics. The New Horizon carried enough emergency pods for maybe 5,000 people. The rest would die when the Council ships carried out their threat. Lieutenant Walsh, the ship's communications officer, spoke first. Sir, our long-range transmitters are still functional. We can send a message to Earth, but it will take 3 months to reach them. Even if they send help immediately, it would take years for a rescue fleet to get here. Reynolds closed his eyes and tried to think. In all his years of dealing with the Council, he had learned to accept their decisions. Humans were the newest members of galactic civilization, barely 200 years since they had developed faster-than-light travel. Every other species had thousands of years of history, advanced technology, and established territorial claims. Humanity was supposed to be grateful for whatever scraps they were given. But looking at the faces of his crew, Reynolds realized something had changed. These were not the expressions of people willing to accept their fate quietly. There was something new there, something that had been building for decades as humanity constantly bent their heads and followed orders from alien governments that saw them as little more than clever animals. The next few hours passed in a blur of desperate activity. Evacuation procedures began immediately, with the youngest and oldest civilians given priority for the limited escape pods. But everyone knew it was not enough. Families were torn apart as parents put their children into pods while knowing they themselves would die. The ship's corridors filled with quiet conversations as people said goodbye to loved ones they would never see again. Reynolds spent those hours recording messages. Messages to Earth explaining what had happened. Messages to his own family back on Luna Colony. Messages to the families of crew members who would not be going home. But the message that took him the longest to write was addressed to Admiral Patricia Hayes, commanding officer of the Sol Defense Fleet. Patricia, by the time you receive this, 30,000 human beings will be dead. Not because of war or accident or natural disaster, but because an alien government decided our lives have no value. They destroyed our ship and gave us 36 hours to evacuate with equipment that can save less than 1/6 of our people. They did this because another species wanted our new home, and the Council decided we did not deserve it. He paused the recording and looked out at the stars. Somewhere out there, Earth continued its orbit around Sol, completely unaware that humanity was about to suffer its greatest tragedy since the plague years of the 22nd century. We followed their rules. We paid their fees. We accepted their restrictions on where we could go and how many worlds we could settle. We have been model citizens of their galactic community. And when it became convenient for them, they sentenced 30,000 of us to death with the casual indifference they might show to stepping on an insect. The evacuation pods began launching 12 hours later. Reynolds stayed at his post, watching the small craft disappear into the darkness as they headed for the nearest habitable system. They carried humanity's children and elders, the ones who might survive long enough for a rescue that would probably never come. When Admiral Theron's deadline arrived, 25,000 people were still aboard the New Horizon. They gathered in the ship's main assembly hall, holding hands and singing old Earth songs as the Council enforcement ships powered up their weapons. Some prayed to the various gods that humanity had carried with them to the stars. Others simply held their families close and waited for the end. The first energy blast punched through the colony ship's hull like it was made of paper. Atmosphere rushed out into space, carrying with it the dreams and hopes of an entire generation. But as the New Horizon died, something else was born in the cold vacuum between the stars. The escape pod's transmissions reached Earth 3 months later, along with Reynolds's final message. The Global Assembly held an emergency session that lasted for 18 hours. When they emerged, humanity spoke with a single voice for the first time in its history. The age of following alien rules was over. The factory floors of Detroit Station hummed with activity that had not been seen since the great terraforming projects of the early colonization era. Workers moved between massive assembly lines where civilian transport vessels had been built just months before. Now those same production facilities churned out components for something entirely different, though few of the workers knew exactly what they were building. Emma Foster walked through the controlled chaos with a data pad in her hand, checking production quotas that officially did not exist. As far as the Galactic Council's trade monitors knew, humanity was simply reorganizing their manufacturing sector for better integration with galactic commerce. The paperwork showed increased production of agricultural equipment, mining tools, and civilian spacecraft components. The reality was somewhat different. Emma stopped at a workstation where technicians were installing guidance systems into what looked like standard cargo containers. The young woman operating the installation laser looked up as Emma approached. "How many more of these do we need to complete, Dr. Foster?" Emma consulted her data pad. "Another 1,200 units by the end of the week. Remember, these are officially listed as automated farming equipment for the outer colonies." The technician nodded and returned to her work. She did not ask why automated farming equipment needed military-grade targeting computers and armor-piercing warheads. Everyone involved in the project had learned not to ask questions that did not need answers. Across human space, similar scenes were playing out on dozens of worlds. The orbital shipyards above Mars worked around the clock, supposedly building new freight haulers for expanded trade with Council species. On Europa, the research stations that had once studied alien technology for peaceful applications, now reverse-engineered, captured Council weapons systems. The asteroid mining platforms in the outer system stockpiled raw materials at unprecedented rates. Robert Kane guided his reconnaissance ship through the debris field at the edge of Council territory, his sensors recording everything they detected. Officially, he was conducting a scientific survey of cosmic phenomena for the Human Space Research Foundation. The Foundation was a legitimate organization that had existed for decades, studying the strange physics effects that occurred near the boundaries between different species' territories. What the Foundation's alien observers did not know was that Kane's real mission had nothing to do with cosmic phenomena. He was mapping every Council military installation within 100 light-years of human space, cataloging their defenses, their patrol routes, and their response times to various types of threats. Kane's ship, the Deep Survey, looked exactly like what it claimed to be: a civilian research vessel with oversized sensor arrays and minimal defensive systems. The Council's border monitors had grown accustomed to seeing human research ships wandering through the outer regions, usually crewed by the kind of scientists who were more interested in stellar mechanics than military strategy. They had no way of knowing that Kane was a 20-year veteran of Human Space Command's Intelligence Division, or that his cosmic phenomena research was actually creating the most detailed map of Council defenses that had ever existed. Another patrol squadron, bearing 27 Mark 15, reported his sensor operator, Lieutenant Mills. Same pattern as the others: 3 light cruisers, standard formation, following the shipping lane towards the Rigel system. Kane made a note on his tactical display. The Council's military deployments followed predictable patterns, designed more for showing force to their own member species than for defending against external threats. Their ships were positioned to control trade routes and suppress rebellions, not to fight an actual war against a determined enemy. They're built for policing, not combat, Mills observed, echoing Kane's thoughts. Look at these deployment patterns. Everything's focused inward, toward their own territory. They don't expect anyone to attack them from outside. Kane nodded grimly. The Council had ruled galactic civilization for so long that they could not imagine anyone being foolish enough to challenge their authority directly. They had grown comfortable in their power, confident that their technological superiority and massive fleets made them invincible. They were about to learn how dangerous comfort could be. Meanwhile, in the research laboratories of New Geneva Colony, Dr. Michael Torres was putting the finishing touches on humanity's answer to Council military technology. Project Prometheus had started as a simple reverse engineering effort, an attempt to understand how alien weapons and defense systems worked. But as the project developed, Torres and his team had realized something important. Human technology did not need to copy alien designs. It needed to exploit alien weaknesses. "Run the simulation again," Torres told his research team as they gathered around the holographic display in the center of their laboratory. The display showed 2 fleets engaged in combat, one representing typical Council forces and the other showing the new human ship designs. The simulation began with the Council fleet in a standard defensive formation, their energy shields raised and their weapons charged. The human ships approached in what appeared to be a chaotic, undisciplined attack pattern. Council tactical doctrine called for maintaining formation integrity and focusing fire on the largest enemy vessels first. But the human attack did not follow any recognizable tactical doctrine. Individual ships broke formation to pursue different targets. Some vessels ignored enemy fire entirely, charging directly into the Council line. Others hung back and fired from extreme range with weapons that seemed designed to cause maximum damage rather than elegant precision. The Council fleet's artificial intelligence systems tried to predict human behavior based on mathematical models of rational tactical thinking. They failed completely. Human commanders made decisions based on intuition, emotion, and split-second improvisation that no computer could anticipate. The simulation ended with the complete destruction of the Council force. "The key is unpredictability," Torres explained to his team. "Every other species in the galaxy fights according to established principles of warfare. They use complex AI systems to coordinate their fleets because their tactical thinking is logical and systematic. But humans are different. We adapt, we improvise, we change our entire strategy in the middle of battle based on nothing more than a gut feeling." Dr. Liu, his second in command, raised a concern that had been bothering the team for weeks. "But Michael, what happens when they adapt to our tactics? Once they've seen our approach in action, they'll develop countermeasures." Torres smiled grimly. "That's the beautiful part, Liu. They can't adapt to chaos. Every human commander will fight differently. Every battle will use different tactics. They'll spend years trying to develop responses to strategies we'll never use twice. As the months passed, humanity's secret preparations reached completion. The industrial output of every human world had been quietly redirected toward military production. Civilian cargo ships had been converted into troop transports. Mining equipment had been modified into assault vehicles. Even the great generation ships that had carried humanity to the stars were being refitted with weapons and armor. The final piece of the puzzle came when the Council delivered their next ultimatum. The Mindari Collective, having successfully claimed Kepler 438b, had decided they needed additional living space. New Terra, humanity's oldest and most prosperous colony outside the Sol system, would be evacuated within one standard month to make room for Mindari expansion. The message was delivered with the same casual indifference that had characterized the Kepler incident. Humanity would comply or face the consequences. The Council fleet would arrive in 30 days to oversee the evacuation and ensure that humans did not damage any infrastructure that might be useful to the new inhabitants. This time, there were no desperate pleas for reconsideration, no frantic diplomatic communications, no attempts to negotiate a compromise. The human response was brief and professional. Message received and understood. Evacuation procedures will begin immediately. What the Council did not know was that evacuation procedures had indeed begun. But humanity was not evacuating New Terra, they were evacuating everyone else. Admiral Patricia Hayes stood in the command center of the Sol Defense Fleet's headquarters, watching status reports flow in from across human space. Every military vessel humanity possessed was moving toward predetermined positions. Every planetary defense grid was activating. Every civilian population center was implementing emergency protocols that had been practiced in secret for months. "All units report ready, Admiral," her chief of staff reported. "The trap is set." Hayes nodded and turned to look out at the stars. Somewhere out there, a Council fleet was approaching New Terra, expecting to find the same broken and defeated humans they had crushed at Kepler. Instead, they would find something entirely different. They would find humanity at war. The asteroid belt around New Terra had been quiet for 3 weeks, showing no signs of the mining activity that had made the system one of humanity's most prosperous colonies. Admiral Theron studied the tactical displays from the bridge of his flagship, the massive dreadnought Galactic Authority, and felt a growing sense of unease. His fleet of 200 ships represented the largest Council military force ever assembled for a simple evacuation operation. But after the embarrassing incident at Kepler, where human escape pods had somehow reached a nearby system and spread stories about Council brutality, the High Command had decided to make an overwhelming show of force. This time, there would be no survivors to tell tales. "Admiral, we're detecting no orbital platforms around New Terra," reported his tactical officer, a member of the precise and logical Zenthari species. "Long-range scans show minimal electromagnetic signatures from the planet's surface. It appears the human evacuation is proceeding as ordered." Theron nodded, though something about the situation felt wrong. Humans were emotional and unpredictable, but they had never simply abandoned a major colony without some form of protest. Where were the desperate diplomatic communications? Where were the civilian ships carrying refugees? Where was the chaotic panic that usually accompanied human military movements? The answer came when his fleet reached the inner system and spread out in standard formation to begin orbital bombardment of any remaining human installations. That was when Robert Kane's forces revealed themselves. The first human ship to decloak was positioned directly behind Theron's flagship. The Retribution, Admiral Hayes's personal command vessel, was uglier than any warship the Council had ever seen. Where Council ships were elegant and streamlined, designed as much for appearance as function, the human dreadnought was a brutal collection of armor plating, weapon mounts, and oversized engines. It looked like something that had been built in a scrapyard by people who cared nothing for aesthetics. "Contact the human vessel," Theron ordered, though his weapons officers were already powering up the Galactic Authority's defensive systems. "Inform them that they are in violation of Council military regulations and must surrender immediately. The human response was not a communication. It was a massive energy discharge from weapons that should not have been able to penetrate Council shields. The Retribution fired at point-blank range, her guns designed not for elegant precision but for raw, overwhelming damage. Theron's flagship shuddered as energy barriers that had never failed against any known weapon simply dissolved under the human assault. "Impossible," Theron whispered as his ship's hull began to buckle. "Their technology is primitive. Their weapons cannot." The Galactic Authority exploded in a ball of superheated plasma, taking Admiral Theron and 800 crew members with it. The shockwave from the blast damaged 3 nearby Council cruisers and sent debris flying across the formation. That was when the rest of the human fleet revealed itself. Kane's ships had been hiding throughout the asteroid belt for weeks, their hulls coated with sensor-absorbing materials that made them invisible to Council detection systems. Now they emerged like predators, falling on the scattered Council formations with savage intensity. The humans did not fight like any species the Council had encountered before. Their tactics made no sense according to established military doctrine. Instead of maintaining formation integrity, human ships broke apart and attacked individual Council vessels in seemingly random patterns. Instead of focusing on enemy command ships, they targeted whatever was closest or most convenient. Captain Mills commanded one of the smaller human vessels, a converted cargo hauler that officially did not exist in any military database. Her ship, the New Hope, was outgunned by even the smallest Council patrol craft. But Mills had spent months studying Council ship designs, looking for weaknesses that could be exploited. "Target their shield generators," she ordered her weapons officer, as they closed with a Council destroyer. "Ignore everything else. Put everything we have into those specific points." The Council destroyer's captain tried to follow standard defensive protocols, rotating his shields to distribute the damage evenly across all defensive systems. But human weapons were not designed to be distributed. They were designed to break things. The New Hope's guns fired repeatedly at the same small section of the destroyer's shields until the defensive barrier failed completely. Then Mills ordered her ship to ram the enemy vessel directly. "Captain, we'll be destroyed in the collision," her pilot protested. "Maybe," Mills replied calmly. "But we'll take them with us. And that's what matters." The New Hope struck the Council destroyer at full velocity, tearing both ships apart in the explosion that could be seen from orbit around New Terra. But before she died, Mills had sent a signal to 3 other human vessels, giving them the exact shield frequencies and weapon signatures they needed to destroy their own targets. Across the battlefield, similar scenes played out as human commanders made decisions that violated every principle of civilized warfare. They used damaged ships as guided missiles. They detonated their own reactors to create temporary electromagnetic pulses that disabled enemy sensors. They even vented atmosphere from their ships to confuse thermal tracking systems, then ambushed pursuing Council vessels with weapons fire from unexpected angles. The Council fleet's artificial intelligence systems tried desperately to predict human behavior and develop appropriate countermeasures. Every time they calculated an optimal response to one human tactic, the humans would switch to something completely different. Their strategy seemed to be controlled chaos, with individual commanders making split-second decisions based on intuition, rather than mathematical analysis. Commander Torres led a squadron of human fighters in an attack on the Council fleet's supply ships. These vessels were lightly defended, considered safe targets far behind the main battle line. But Torres had learned from studying Council tactical doctrine that their entire military philosophy was based on maintaining proper formations and protecting key assets. "Ignore the warships," he told his pilots over the communication channel. "Hit the supply vessels, the medical ships, the command posts. Make them choose between protecting their combat units and protecting their support infrastructure." The fighter attack succeeded beyond Torres's wildest expectations. Council fleet commanders, trained to fight honorable battles between military forces, were completely unprepared for an enemy that deliberately targeted non-combat vessels. They had to choose between maintaining their attack formation and protecting their supply lines. They chose to protect their support ships, pulling combat vessels out of formation to guard convoys that were supposed to be safe behind the lines. This gave the main human fleet the opportunity to attack isolated Council warships with overwhelming local superiority. The battle lasted 6 hours. When it was over, the most powerful Council fleet ever assembled had been completely destroyed. Only a handful of ships escaped, mostly by abandoning their positions and fleeing at maximum speed toward the nearest Council territory. Admiral Hayes stood on the bridge of the Retribution, looking out at a debris field that stretched across millions of kilometers of space. The human fleet had taken heavy losses as well, but they had proven something important. Council technology was not invincible. Council tactics could be defeated. The galactic order that had seemed permanent and unchangeable could be broken by people who were desperate enough and angry enough to try. "Send a message to Earth," Hayes ordered her communications officer. "Tell them the first battle is won. Tell them it's time to show the galaxy what happens when you push humanity too far." The survivors who made it back to Council space brought reports that seemed impossible. Primitive humans could not have defeated the galaxy's most advanced military force. Their weapons were inferior, their ships were outdated, and their tactical thinking was chaotic and undisciplined. But the debris field around New Terra told a different story. The wreckage of 200 Council ships drifted in the darkness, silent testimony to what humans could accomplish when they stopped following alien rules and started writing their own. The message spread across the galaxy within days. For the first time in centuries, a species had successfully defied the Council's authority and lived to tell about it. Some member species celebrated in secret, dreaming of their own liberation from Council control. Others recoiled in horror at the breakdown of galactic civilization. But in the halls of power on the Council homeworlds, there was only one response. The humans had gone too far, and they would be crushed with overwhelming force before their rebellion could spread to other species. The war had begun. The emergency session of the Galactic Council lasted for 3 days, with representatives from 200 species arguing over how to respond to humanity's unprecedented act of rebellion. The Great Assembly Hall on the Council homeworld of Centauri, Prime had not seen such chaos in over 1,000 years, as delegates shouted accusations and demands in dozens of different languages. High Counselor Zenth of the ruling Altair Collective finally restored order by activating the chamber's silence field, cutting off all sound until the representatives returned to their designated speaking positions. When the field deactivated, his voice carried clearly to every corner of the massive amphitheater. "The human threat must be eliminated completely," Zenth declared, his blue scales darkening with anger. "Not just defeated, not just contained, but utterly destroyed. Every human world will be occupied, every human ship captured or destroyed, every human leader executed as an example to other species who might consider similar acts of rebellion." The response was immediate and overwhelming. Species after species rose to pledge their support to the grand fleet that was already assembling in staging areas throughout Council space. 10,000 ships from dozens of different worlds, representing the largest military force in galactic history. The humans would learn what happened to primitives who dared challenge the established order of civilization. What the Council could not know was that humanity had been preparing for exactly this response. Ryan Torres crouched in the maintenance tunnels beneath Rigel Station, one of the Council's primary fuel depots, listening to the vibrations that told him guard patrols were passing overhead. The station was heavily defended, with energy shields, automated weapon systems, and a garrison of Council security forces. Under normal circumstances, it would be impossible for a small human strike force to penetrate such defenses. But these were not normal circumstances. Torres and his team had arrived at Rigel disguised as civilian maintenance workers, using forged identification codes that had cost the Human Intelligence Services months to develop. Their cover story was that they were installing new atmospheric recycling systems as part of a routine efficiency upgrade. The Council's bureaucratic nature worked in their favor. No one questioned properly filed paperwork, even when it came from species they were preparing to exterminate. "Charges are in position," reported Sergeant Blake over the team's encrypted communication system. "We've got thermal explosives on the main fuel lines, electromagnetic pulses for the computer systems, and incendiary devices in the ammunition storage areas." Torres checked his chronometer. Similar attacks were being launched simultaneously across dozens of star systems, all timed to occur when the Grand Fleet was furthest from their supply bases. The strategy was simple, but devastating. While the HFY Council focused on assembling their massive military force, humans would destroy the logistical networks that kept that force operational. "Execute on my mark," Torres whispered into his communicator. Around him he could hear the sounds of normal station operations, cargo being moved, ships being refueled, personnel going about their daily routines. None of them knew they had minutes left to live. Mark. The explosions began in the station's lower levels, where fuel lines carried volatile chemicals used to power the massive warships of the Grand Fleet. The thermal charges Torres' team had planted caused catastrophic chain reactions that raced through the station's infrastructure, faster than automated safety systems could respond. Within minutes, Rigel Station was the expanding ball of fire and debris. The fuel depot that had served Council military operations for over 3 centuries was gone, along with enough fuel to supply 100 dreadnoughts for months of combat operations. Similar scenes played out across Council space as humans strike. Teams emerged from hiding to attack targets that had been considered completely secure. Communication relays that coordinated fleet movements went silent. Shipyards that built replacement vessels for damaged warships erupted in flames. Supply convoys carrying ammunition and spare parts to forward operating bases simply vanished. The humans were not fighting a gentleman's war between opposing military forces. They were attacking the entire infrastructure that supported Council civilization, using tactics that violated every accepted principle of civilized combat. They targeted medical facilities that treated wounded Council personnel. They destroyed civilian cargo ships that carried food to Council worlds. They even attacked the families of Council military officers, something that no species in galactic history had ever done before. Admiral Hayes coordinated the campaign from her flagship, now leading a fleet of human vessels that struck without warning and disappeared before Council forces could respond. The retribution had been joined by dozens of other human ships, each one uglier and more heavily armed than anything the Council had encountered. "Target analysis complete," her intelligence officer reported. The Council's command structure relies on centralized coordination through their primary communication network. If we can destroy the relay stations at Wolf 359 and Alpha Centauri, their Grand Fleet will lose contact with approximately 60% of their forces. Hayes studied the tactical displays, weighing the risks against the potential benefits. Both target systems were heavily defended, with orbital platforms, patrol fleets, and automated defense networks. A direct assault would cost her most of her remaining ships, but the alternative was worse. If the Grand Fleet reached human space with their full force intact, no amount of tactical brilliance would save humanity from extermination. "All ships, prepare for simultaneous strikes on both target systems. We'll split our forces and hit them at the same time, before they can warn each other or send reinforcements." The attack on Wolf 359 was led by Commander Kane, whose reconnaissance missions had provided detailed intelligence about the system's defenses. His strike force consisted of 20 human vessels, facing orbital platforms that should have been able to destroy them before they got within weapons range. But Kane had learned that Council defenses were designed to fight rational enemies who followed predictable tactical patterns. Human ships did not behave rationally. Instead of approaching the orbital platforms directly, Kane's vessels flew straight into the system's star, using its gravity well to accelerate to incredible velocities, while the solar radiation masked their heat signatures from Council sensors. When they emerged from the star's corona, they were moving too fast for the orbital platforms to track effectively. "All ships ramming speed," Kane ordered over the communication channel. "Take out as many platforms as possible before they can reorganize their defenses." The battle was over in minutes. Kane's ships, their hulls still glowing from their passage through solar radiation, struck the orbital platforms like guided missiles. The humans made no attempt to preserve their own vessels, focusing entirely on destroying as much Council infrastructure as possible before they died. Kane himself survived long enough to see the primary communication relay go silent, cutting off contact between the Grand Fleet and half of Council space. Then his ship, the Deep Survey, disintegrated under fire from the station's remaining defensive systems. Meanwhile, Hayes led the attack on Alpha Centauri, the oldest and most heavily defended system in Council territory. The system contained not just military installations, but also the ancient shipyards where Council vessels had been built for thousands of years. Destroying them would cripple the Council's ability to replace losses for decades to come. The defenses at Alpha Centauri were unlike anything Hayes had faced before. Massive battle stations with weapons that could destroy planets, automated defense networks with artificial intelligence systems more advanced than anything humanity possessed, and patrol fleets that responded to threats with coordinated precision that seemed almost supernatural. But Hayes had one advantage that the Council could not counter. She was willing to sacrifice everything to achieve her objectives. All civilian vessels implement Protocol 7, she broadcast to her fleet. The word sent chills through every human who heard them. Protocol 7 was the final option, the one they had all hoped would never be necessary. Across her fleet, cargo haulers and passenger ships that had been converted into auxiliary warships suddenly changed course, heading directly for the shipyards at maximum acceleration. Their crews had time for final messages to their families on Earth, brief transmissions that carried love and determination in equal measure. The converted civilian ships struck the ancient shipyards like a meteor storm, their improvised warheads detonating in chain reactions that tore apart construction facilities that had existed since before humans had discovered fire. The loss of life was enormous. Not just the human crews who died in the attacks, but thousands of Council workers who were building the ships that would have carried the Grand Fleet to victory. When the battle was over, Hayes found herself in command of 12 battered human vessels and the smoking ruins of the most important military-industrial complex in Council space. The cost had been terrible, but the strategic objective was achieved. The Grand Fleet, scattered across dozens of star systems and cut off from Central Command, found itself fighting a war it no longer understood against an enemy that refused to follow any recognizable rules of engagement. Hayes sent her final report back to Earth as her damaged fleet limped toward human space. Phase 1 complete. Council military infrastructure is crippled. Their Grand Fleet is blind and scattered. Phase 2 can begin. On Earth, Admiral Patricia, Hayes's message was received by a global assembly that had already voted for the next stage of humanity's response to Council aggression. If the aliens wanted total war, they would get exactly that. But it would be a war fought on humanity's terms, not theirs. The ruins of the Council chambers on Centauri Prime still smoldered as Admiral Patricia Hayes walked through what had once been the seat of galactic government. Her boots crunched on broken crystal and twisted metal, the remains of thousand-year-old artifacts that had represented the pinnacle of interstellar civilization. Now they were nothing but debris scattered across a floor stained with the ashes of a political system that had believed itself eternal. 6 months had passed since the first shot was fired at New Terra, and the galaxy had been transformed beyond recognition. The Grand Fleet that was supposed to crush humanity's rebellion had been scattered to the solar winds, its surviving ships fleeing back to their homeworlds with tales of an enemy that fought like nothing anyone had ever encountered before. Hayes paused at the great window that had once allowed Council delegates to look out at the stars they ruled. The view now showed the wreckage of orbital platforms and the debris of ships that had tried to defend the Council's capital world. Human vessels moved between the wreckage, some collecting salvage, while others stood guard against the possibility of counterattack, but there would be no counterattack. The species that had once formed the backbone of Council power were either hiding in their home systems or actively negotiating surrender terms with human diplomatic teams. The age of alien dominance over galactic politics was over. Admiral, we're receiving surrender requests from 17 more systems, reported Colonel Davies, Hayes's chief of staff. The Zenthari Confederation is offering to provide full intelligence on remaining Council military assets in exchange for protection from revenge attacks by other species. The Rigelian Trade Union wants to discuss economic cooperation agreements. Hayes nodded without turning from the window. The surrenders had been coming in for weeks now, as word spread throughout the galaxy that the humans were not interested in conquest or subjugation. They wanted something far more dangerous to the old order. They wanted to be left alone to build their civilization without interference. What's the status on the Mindari response? Hayes asked. Davies consulted his datapad. They've withdrawn all claims to human territories and sent what appears to be a formal apology. Their message states that their population projections were based on incorrect data, and they no longer require additional worlds for expansion. A bitter smile crossed Hayes's face. The Mindari Collective, whose desire for new Terra had started this entire war, had suddenly discovered that their expansion needs were not as urgent as they had claimed. Apparently, facing the possibility of having their homeworld turned into radioactive dust had clarified their thinking considerably. Emma Foster entered the ruined chamber, her diplomatic credentials allowing her to pass through the human security checkpoints that now controlled access to what remained of the galactic capital. As humanity's new chief diplomatic coordinator, she had spent the last month establishing the framework for what would replace the Council's system of government. The Delphian delegation has arrived, Foster reported. They're requesting a formal alliance agreement and offering to share their biotechnology in exchange for protection from the Altair survivors who are threatening their trade routes. Hayes turned from the window to face Foster. The woman looked exhausted, having spent weeks negotiating with species that were still trying to understand how completely their world had changed. Many of them expected humans to simply take the Council's place, establishing a new empire with humanity at its center. They were going to be disappointed. Tell the Delphians that we're willing to sign a mutual defense agreement, but not an alliance, Hayes said. We're not building an empire, Emma. We're establishing a system where species can cooperate voluntarily without anyone having absolute authority over everyone else. Foster nodded, making notes on her own datapad. The Centaurans are still refusing to participate in any negotiations. They've withdrawn to their core systems and are threatening to fight to the death rather than accept human protection. Let them, Hayes replied. As long as they don't threaten other species or interfere with trade routes, they can isolate themselves as much as they want. We're not going to force anyone to join the new system. This was the part that many galactic observers found most confusing about humanity's approach to their victory. Throughout history, conquering species had always sought to expand their territory and control as many resources as possible. The humans had the military power to dominate the entire galaxy, but they seemed completely uninterested in doing so. The truth was simpler and more terrifying than most aliens could comprehend. Humans had not fought this war for conquest or glory. They had fought for the simple right to exist and expand among the stars without permission from alien governments. Now that they had secured that right, they had no desire to rule over species that had tried to exterminate them. But they also had no intention of allowing the old system to return. Commander Robert Torres, who had survived his mission to destroy Rigel Station, now commanded a human patrol fleet that monitored the former Council territories for signs of emerging threats. His ships were not occupation forces. They were guarantors of a new kind of peace. Contact from the Vegan system, his communications officer reported. Local government is requesting assistance with a piracy problem. Unknown raiders are attacking. Civilian shipping and the Planetary Defense Force can't handle them alone. Torres studied the request carefully. The Vegan system had been a minor member of the Council, contributing taxes and raw materials in exchange for protection that had rarely been needed. Now they were learning what it meant to be responsible for their own security. Send a response, Torres ordered. Tell them we'll dispatch a patrol squadron to investigate, but they need to understand that this isn't the old system. We're not their protectors or their rulers. We're partners who are willing to help when help is needed. This was the new reality that humanity was establishing throughout the galaxy. Species that wanted protection could have it, but they would contribute to their own defense rather than simply relying on someone else's military. Trade routes would be kept open, but by cooperative agreements between the species that used them, not by central government decree. The system was messy, inefficient, and completely unlike the ordered structure that the Council had maintained for centuries. It was also the only way humanity could ensure that no single species would ever again have the power to sentence 30,000 innocent people to death because it was convenient. On the bridge of the New Horizon, Captain David Reynolds watched his ship approach the planet that his colonists had died trying to reach. The vessel had been rebuilt from the wreckage left by Admiral Theron's attack, her hull scarred but her spirit unbroken. The 30,000 colonists who had died in the cold of space had been replaced by volunteers from across human space. People who wanted to honor their sacrifice by building the colony they had dreamed of. Orbital approach confirmed, his navigator reported. New Geneva Colony Control is clearing us for landing at the primary settlement site. Reynolds nodded, remembering the last time he had approached this world. Then, he had been a civilian, colony ship captain following alien rules and hoping for alien permission to build a human home. Now he commanded a vessel escorted by human warships, carrying colonists who would build their new world under the protection of the most feared military force in the galaxy. Send a message to Admiral Hayes, Reynolds ordered. Tell her that the New Horizon has arrived at New Geneva, and humanity is finally home. The message reached Hayes as she prepared to leave Centauri Prime for the journey back to human space. Her work here was done. The Council was finished, its member species either cooperating with the new system or withdrawing to their own territories. The galaxy was quiet, but it was the quiet of species learning to live with the fact that humanity would never again ask permission to exist among the stars. Hayes's final act before leaving the former Council capital was to record a message that would be broadcast to every inhabited world in the galaxy. Standing in the ruins of the chamber where alien governments had once decided the fate of younger species, she spoke directly to the civilizations that would inherit this new age. The war is over. Humanity has won. But we did not fight for conquest or domination. We fought for the right to build our homes where we choose, to raise our children in freedom, and to explore the galaxy without asking permission from those who believe they have authority over us. She paused, looking around at the destruction that surrounded her. We never wanted to become the galaxy's dominant military power. We simply wanted to be left alone to build our civilization among the stars. But when pushed beyond our breaking point, we proved that we were willing to burn down the entire galactic order to protect our right to exist. The message continued, outlining humanity's terms for the new galactic system. Voluntary cooperation between species. Open trade routes protected by joint patrols. Dispute resolution through negotiation rather than force. And above all, the absolute guarantee that no species would ever again have the power to threaten another species' right to exist and expand among the stars. The choice is yours, Hayes concluded. You can join us in building a galaxy where cooperation replaces domination, where negotiation replaces force, and where no species has absolute authority over any other. Or you can withdraw to your own territories and have no contact with the new system we are creating. But what you cannot do is recreate the old order. That age is over, and it will never return. As her ship departed Centauri Prime for the last time, Hayes reflected on what humanity had accomplished and what it had cost. Millions of humans had died in the war, their names recorded in memorials that would stand for generations. Entire star systems had been devastated by fighting that had raged across the galaxy. The ancient civilization that had ruled among the stars for millennia had been reduced to ash and memory. But humanity's children would grow up in a galaxy where no alien government could decide their fate. Human colonists would build their homes on worlds of their choosing, protected by human warships that asked no one's permission to exist. The species that had tried to exterminate them would spend the rest of their existence remembering what happened when they pushed humanity too far. The galaxy was quiet now, and it would remain quiet as long as everyone remembered the lesson written in the wreckage of 10,000 ships. Humanity wanted only to be left alone among the stars. But, if that simple wish was denied, they were perfectly willing to fight the entire galaxy for the right to exist. And they had proven that they could win.